Welcome back to another segment of walk-in talks through neighborhoods so you can see what they're like on foot before you even consider moving down here to Boca Raton, about what areas you may be interested in during your home search process. So right now, we're actually in one of my more favorite areas. It's called New Floresta, not to get confused online with Old Floresta. These are completely two different neighborhoods in different parts of Boca Raton. One is here in Central Boca. The New Floresta right here is more Central Boca, while Old Floresta is going to be more of an East Boca environment. Some of the highlights of this particular neighborhood is usually the well-maintained houses. Most houses in here are built in the mid 1980s, so they are on, the older side. They are younger than what you'll get in East Boca, but just be aware they're not brand new homes in here. But this neighborhood has a characteristic of having older homes that are very well taken care of. The neighborhood is very mature with mature trees. As you can see, I'm walking on sidewalks, very easily to get around the neighborhood. Now, your price point in this neighborhood, the most affordable home in this neighborhood is currently listed at $1.2 million, and they go all the way up to $2 million in this particular neighborhood. Now, just from my own personal experience in dealing with homes in this price point, when the homes in here get listed and they're listed, in that 1.2 to 2 million mark, you're never probably going to pay the asking price. The prices in here tend to get marked up fairly high. But again, when you're competing against new construction in this price point, you have Lotus Edge, Lotus Palm, Lotus, all the newer homes from GL Homes. It makes it much harder to negotiate for these prices, the asking price when they first get listed. So most of these homes will be sold below asking. If you're working with a real estate agent who's not me, is telling you have to go at asking or below in this particular neighborhood, that's not the case. Homes in here tend to get marked high and negotiate lower, and that's a common trend in this particular neighborhood. Now, the HOA dues in this area is going to be right around $200 a month. And this basically maintains the landscaping of the trees along the sidewalk. As you can tell, there's a lot of trees planted along these sidewalks. It's great for a day like today where the rain is hit or miss. Again, blue skies right there, gray skies here, and rain every once in a while currently in Boca Raton. So the HOA isn't bad. It's not a bad HOA here, and it tends just to maintain the landscape environment around the sidewalks and the entrance of the school. Talking about the entrance of this neighborhood, the actual entrance of this neighborhood is directly across from the Pinecrest Private School, one of the top private schools here in Florida. So if you're looking to send your kid to Pinecrest and you want a place that's very easy for you to basically walk your kid to school or drop them off fairly easy, at the stoplight, you just drive directly across the street and you're pretty much there. And there's crosswalks there as well, so your kids can easily get to school. If you want to go to, there's also another private school directly down St. Andrews. The Spanish River Private School is located right there. So some people in this area, they still send their kids there as well. Some people believe that at one point Verde was too overcrowded on a popular elementary school here, so a lot of them started sending their kid to the other elementary school, the private one. As I just mentioned, there wasn't the Blue Lake Elementary School that just opened up, and some parents felt like some of the schools were getting a little bit too crowded, so they started sending them in this particular neighborhood to the Spanish River Private School. However, since this is Blue Lake, a lot of families in here send their kids to their zone, Blue Lake Elementary, and you'll notice as we're walking the little Blue Lake Elementary School bumper sticker on the back of their cars. Again, as we're walking, you can tell these homes are older, but they're all very, very well maintained. And for the topic of this particular video, as you get to see what the neighborhood is like on foot of New Floresta, it's going to be about the flooding here in South Florida, what is it actually like? What's causing it? Because I see it on news, it gets blown out where it's like everything's flooded and destroyed here. And you know, there was a massive flood event here in South Florida last year, and there was one very recently here in Sarasota, across the opposite side of South Florida here. But during those flood events, not all of the areas flooded equally. So we're going to get into that in this video, like what you need to know in order to keep your family and your home safe from flooding here in South Florida. If you don't care about the topic, just enjoy the walk-in tour of the neighborhood so you can see what it's actually like to live here. So before we start anything, we need to start off a brief geography lesson of Florida in general. So you have Florida. A lot of people say it's shaped like a gun or something, but towards the very bottom of Florida, when you're getting towards South Florida, we have this massive lake there, and that's called Lake Okeechobee. And there's this large body of water that's supposed to naturally drain from that lake into the Everglades, filter out, and go into the Gulf area, into the Atlantic Ocean. And for a long period of time, we didn't have all these developments and, you know, buildings down here. So we didn't have to worry, well, people weren't here, so they didn't worry about flooding per se. But then people started getting creative and they moved down here during the early 1900s, and sometime right in the 1920s, they got even more creative and they built a wooden dike right there off the lake to recapture some of the frequently flooded land here in South Florida. Well, in 1928, a massive hurricane actually slammed into Lake Okeechobee, destroying their man-made dike, then flooded all the communities below the lake, because the lake actually got pushed out over the land and flooded everything that was below the lake. So there's actually a memorial there in Belgrade of the thousands of people who died. A lot of people were just buried in a group burial, so they didn't have their own graves. It was just a mass burial site. Since then, the National Guard and the government got really serious about preventing flooding. So they built this project called the Hoover Dike. So if you know anything about the Hoover Dam, there's now a Hoover Dike down here in South Florida, and it's pretty massive, it's secure, it's something that's built not out of wood to protect people and their lives down here in South Florida. So if you go online and you look up all these histories of flooding here in South Florida, you may find incidents where thousands of people have lost their lives, unfortunately, due to flooding. But that has since been changed ever since the Hoover Dike has been established. And going past the Hoover Dike, they actually dredge out unnaturally all the canals here in South Florida. So if you look from like Google Maps and you look down, you see all these canals and intercoastal waterways. A lot of those aren't naturally there. They're actually dredged out, help to control the water that is, you know, all the drops of rain that goes here in South Florida every single day, and the water from the lake. It's all man-controlled by a complex system of canals, drainages, and pumps, where pretty much all the water doesn't flow naturally here in South Florida. It artificially gets drained off in different directions in different ways to help prevent any type of flooding. And during times, they will shut off certain canals to have certain areas flood versus other areas as well. And this is actually pretty controversial. But overall, the people and the government has gotten really effective at controlling the floodwaters in South Florida the best they can. But due to the other part of the geography here in South Florida, if you didn't realize, the further you go south, the more flat everything is. Pretty much there's no mountains, no hills. Everything is relatively flat compared to the others. And not all of South Florida is equally flat either, and equally low lying. So a lot of times you'll see these pictures and videos of these massive flooded areas here in South Florida. But what they don't tell you, these are areas that are naturally always flooded. So if you are moving down here from somewhere else and you're looking at these neighborhoods and homes and you have no idea about the area, it's going to be much harder for you to buy a home yourself if you don't have anybody helping you, a family, a friend, or you can contact me. Here's my contact information below. I'd love to help you and your family locate your home down here in Boca Raton or the surrounding areas, because one thing is that even in a neighborhood like this, if we put up a map of the Boca Raton flood map, the official one from the city, there's certain homes even in here that are highlighted with a potential flood risk, even though this neighborhood may not even be in a flood zone greater than category X, where you don't even have to have flood insurance. There will be homes in a neighborhood even like this that you may want to consider getting flood insurance, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. And then throughout South Florida in general, all the elevations are drastically different. So you always hear about Florida being right at sea level, but it's not. It's very varied in the elevation in general. So where I'm at now in Boca Raton, Florida, the average elevation is right around 13 feet above sea level. So in perspective, if you buy a home that's, everything around here is at 13 feet, but your home is at, say, 8 feet above elevation, this is where you get homes that flood in neighborhoods in pockets and not the entire neighborhood. And as we go down South Florida, you'll find Fort Lauderdale is only 9 feet above sea level. Miami on average is 6 feet above sea level, due to certain areas such as Little Haiti being much more elevated than the other parts of Miami. When you hear about Brickell and other places, these unique areas are only, I believe, about 3 feet above sea level. Heck, even Key West, the average is actually 8 feet above sea level. If you're wondering about middle part of Florida, Orlando's 80 feet on average above sea level. And then all the way up north in downtown Pensacola, it's only 20 feet above sea level. So you may be surprised is that it's not exactly all the locations. You may be surprised it's not completely uniform, where the more you go up, sometimes the ground can get even lower. And this is where we're getting at with Sarasota. So there's a recent incident in Sarasota that mainly affected the bottom left part of the city. And this particular part is lower in elevation compared to rest of Sarasota because of the gradient of the slope away from the city, and even parts near the west of the trail area, so the far west part, it actually made the water accumulate in that one particular area there in South Florida. In Sarasota, we saw all the cars flooded, the neighborhoods, people were actually on kayaks to try and ride out, literally paddling out of their neighborhood. And this is due to the elevation difference in Sarasota itself. So again, if you need help, if you're looking to relocate, this is why it's important to at least know the area pretty well, work with people, and we're going to talk about what you can do moving forward to protect yourself as well. Now, if you need to know about some low-lying areas here in Boca Raton, I would highly recommend you check out videos that show the neighborhood of Old Floresta during heavy rains. Check out videos that show 441 and Glades Road, the intersection out there in West Boca, very commonly floods in that area. And a lot of communities off of Federal Highway 1 in Boca Raton have issues with flooding. Even some of the most expensive real estate out there, they'll be right there kind of on the intercoastal, those little fingers that go out there with some land into the water. Those areas during heavy rains, it's not uncommon to see homeowners out there just looking to see if the water is going to make it inside the door. So it's something to be aware of. Just because the home is $2 million doesn't mean it doesn't have massive flood issues going on. So again, one of the first steps you can do to make sure you and your family are not buying a home in a flood zone is to use the link below. It'll be the Boca Raton City's official flood zone map. So you'll look at this map, look on Zillow or whatever your agent is using to provide you, and compare the two. So what you're looking for is my particular corner in my neighborhood, because it goes in the details all the way down to the street level. And you can see if the particular home you're interested in is one of the low-lying houses in that neighborhood. So regardless of the flood zone for the neighborhood that you may get from the official documents, you can see from the flood map, is your home the lower line area? Now can better help you when you're looking at homes, you're not sure, like maybe this home is priced this way because it's in a flood zone, like what's wrong with it? This would be a great tool that pretty much everybody can use regardless of your experience with the area, because it's already mapped out for you. Another great thing to do is just ask the neighbors. People love to help other people. Some of the best things you can do to start a conversation is ask for help. In a neighborhood like this, I'm pretty sure if I asked anybody here about their experience living in the neighborhood, they'll probably love to share their experience. Another thing you can do to help yourself is, again, use a local real estate agent who you can trust, who you believe will guide you in the right direction in your home purchase process. If you trust them that they're gonna guide you the right direction of avoiding a massive catastrophic flood zone with 6 feet from baseline flooding, that would be catastrophic for you. That would be somebody who you would want to use. Another tip that you can do to protect yourself is, once you put an offer on a house, you're gonna have to start getting insurance in general. You can ask your insurance broker if there's ever been claims on that house for flood damage, and that will let you know that, as you know, if you believe in sea level rise or probability that you may get a house that will be flooded in the future, if you at least know it's been flooded in the past, that'll give you a good general idea if this is something that you need to be concerned about or worried about. And if you're in the area and you're renting or you're staying in a different neighborhood, I would highly recommend, if you're staying really close to the neighborhood that you're considering buying in, I would highly recommend you just drive through the area during heavy rains and see how bad the flooding is. There was one particular house that I had to purchase at one point, and I didn't believe anybody that the home wouldn't flood, even though it was, you know, a higher elevation, the dirt, the home foundation was raised 24 inches off the ground. We had a Hurricane Sally came through, and I got in one of my friends lifted up pickup trucks, and we actually toured the neighborhood to see if the home would actually flood or not during the hurricane surge. And we're very fortunate to see that, yeah, there might have been like, you know, a foot of water in the sidewalk and road, but the elevation of the home itself really saved it from being flooded or having any type of worry about flooding. The water didn't even make it to the foundation. So that was something that brought us a peace of mind, is just checking out the area during heavy rains. Now we're going into one of the most controversial topics, is, do you need flood insurance? Well, let's take a brief snippet from the Sarasota video about what happened to them. So as you can see, the homes that had massive flood damage to the height of grown-ups weren't even in flood zones. But if they use something like a flood map or probability elevation map, they would have saw that the area was at risk during heavy rain events. And again, don't trust anybody who tells you your house is not in a flood zone, because every single house here in Boca Raton in Florida is in some type of flood zone. Usually what they mean is flood zone X, and the probability of it flooding is very little. Or they may hit you with like flood zone X/500. That just means it's very rare, but it's the probability that it may actually flood. And home mortgages, home lenders, and your mortgage company will not require you to have flood insurance on these two type of ratings. While flood rating of say A or B with a baseline flooding would require you mandatory to have flood insurance on these particular properties. Again, remember, just because it doesn't require flood insurance doesn't mean that your home itself would not flood. Now, if you're buying an older home, such as, you know, the ones built in here in the 80s, and your roof is greater than say 20 years old, you may be required to use an insurance agent of last resort here in Florida called Citizens. Now, if you use Citizens moving forward throughout the next few years, you're going to be forced to get flood insurance on your property, because they're trying to protect their investments as much as they can, because they're actually worried about being insolvent apparently. So something to be aware of. And the cost of your flood insurance is going to vary greatly. If you're not in a mandatory area where you need to get flood insurance is relatively cheap here in Florida, because it's sponsored by the government. Now, if you're in a massive flood zone and your house is flooded multiple times, flood insurance may be very expensive, and it might be prohibitive for you to actually purchase a home. The home value may be at a point where you could, you know, see yourself budgeting to live in this home, this property with your taxes and insurance and mortgage. But once you hit flood insurance, it may be over, say, $10,000 a year, depending how bad of a flood zone you're actually in. Now, if you're not in a flood zone, should you even bother with flood insurance? And the answer is maybe. So for this particular neighborhood, if you overline the Google Cities flood map and your home is not on it, you ask the neighbors. There's been several major hurricanes that slammed into Boca Raton since this neighborhood was built. If you ask them, like, has your house ever flooded? Again, a lot of neighbors have lived in these homes for many years, and they'll love to tell you if the street floods, if the home flooded, what's going on. Also, if you're on a canal, if you're near a body of water, this also puts your home at risk. Is your home slightly elevated? So even in this neighborhood, you'll notice some homes are actually kind of flat on the ground, while others, like the ones behind me, have a slight elevation to the front of the home. So it also depends on the very particular home. At the end of the day, it's always about assessing the risk. So if I had a fear of my home being flooded, even that particular home that I purchased that did not flood, I also got flood insurance on there. It was only like $720 for the year, but it brought me a peace of mind that if something happened, at least I have some type of coverage that was still affordable for me and my circumstance. Would I personally buy a home in a flood zone? That's a whole nother question, and that's going to be a major personal decision. So there's a neighborhood out here called Camino Gardens, and you get some very beautiful intercoastal landscaping backdrop for your backyard. And you have to make a decision if you want to risk the chance of your home flooding for that backdrop of the intercoastal and the type of lifestyle that you want. Everybody's belief on this is going to be slightly different. I personally avoid flood zones. If you want to be in a flood zone, if you want to be in an area very close to water, that's a personal choice, and I'll help you the best I can. But for me personally, I avoid flood zones when I purchase properties. They get me nervous. And if we get hit by a hurricane, I just want to think about the wind, but I don't want to think about the water damage, because this brings on to another point about making a flood insurance claim. So I've known so many people who filed claims with their flood insurance to not get paid up to about a year later. So they did get paid, but they had to take care of a lot of the expenses up front for their home. If you know anything about a flooded home, you have to tear out the drywall to where it's damaged, tear out the kitchen cabinets. Sometimes the floors have to be replaced, the electrical systems, and if it's salt water, it's even worse. And then you have to worry about it, molding, because in South Florida, we have tons of mold issues here in homes that get flooded and they don't get properly ventilated. So a lot of incidents, you'll have massive flood events with hurricanes. So your home will get flooded, you'll lose power, you lose your air conditioner, and you create this wet, hot environment that mold will just love to grow in. And it's something that will cause you a lot more headache than you actually think. But then again, it's all about balance, about what you want. A particular highlight about Boca Raton, it was the only city in Palm Beach County that received a storm ready certification, where they keep their drainage very clean. The waterways are ready to run and prevent flooding. A lot of places here in Boca Raton don't have flooding like they do in some of these other cities. We're looking at you at Fort Lauderdale, and they take great pride of taking care of the city. So your taxes are going to actually make your city beautiful, but also safe for your investment down here. That's why I purchased property in this area. I believe that this community takes a lot of pride of ownership. And if you look around the neighborhood, again, these homes are older, but they're very well taken care of. And this is one of the highlights of this particular neighborhood. If you're interested in moving into a neighborhood like this, yes, for some people it could be expensive, but for others, the type of lifestyle you get in here, you get nice walkways, you get a non-dramatic HOA, you get a mature landscape to your homes, and a lot of the neighbors will have pride of ownership that you may not see in some other neighborhoods in certain cities and communities. So if you're interested in a neighborhood like this, reach out to me. I'd love to represent you and get you the home that you want in this neighborhood. Other than that, stay tuned to the next video right here and take care.